Nora Speaks is a weekly podcast that tugs at the soul and consciousness of the Black community. With show topics such as youth empowerment, education, women's impact, and civic engagement, Nora Speaks challenges the listener to not only join the movement, but be the movement. On the show, you'll learn from insightful guests who have demonstrated capacity in these fields and more, and I'm your host, Nora Muhammad. Welcome to the show. Welcome to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast, and I am your host, Nora Muhammad. Thanks for joining me in another episode of the podcast. If this is your first time listening, I am Nora Muhammad, and I'm glad that you're with me. This is a weekly podcast, and the goal is to edify the Black community, is edify our people with the intention of improving outcomes, bringing awareness, knowledge of self, knowledge of others, and knowledge of the time and what we must do in the time. In this episode, I am talking about parenting and what a big job parenting is. And I am a parent of two young adults. I'm someone that is engaged in the community. I participate in programs, educational programs, workshop programs, life skill programs. And so I've been working with young people probably for about 15, 16 years now. And it's certainly a privilege to have the opportunity to share information and resources with our coming generation. How fortunate it is that we get the opportunity to impact those young people who are coming behind us, to be knowledgeable, to be informed, to be capable, to be competent, and to be the future leaders, the future servants, the future doctors, the future mechanics, the future caregivers, the future parents. And that's certainly not something that I take lightly. And those who are in service with our young people, I'm sure it's not something you take lightly either. And in getting into this episode, parenting, one way that I describe parenting is warfare. And certainly parenting is warfare in a modern America. It's so much that we have to do in rearing our children, in raising our children, in training our children, teaching them good manners, helping them develop confidence and esteem, helping them discover their talents and their abilities, and pushing them to discipline themselves, to hone those talents, to strengthen and sharpen those natural skills that they have. It's the most incredible job and the most incredible journey in guiding a young person into adulthood. And as a mother, it's the most rewarding experience that I can say that I've had, that Allah God has blessed me to have. And it's something, because as I was raising my children, my sons, I was constantly scanning the horizon for threats, whether those threats were people, places, or concepts and ideas. And generally, concepts and ideas that come from a source other than my son's parents, other than those who are close to me in our family, in our community, and even in the family. One would need to be vigilant, because everyone in the family doesn't have the same value set. Everyone in the family, don't think alike or have the same mindset. So, as a parent, as a mother, I was constantly scanning the horizon and to identify threats. And in popular culture, there's so much that is vying for our children's attention. There's concepts and ideas that are trying to bleed into the mindset and the characteristics of our young people, you know, and many of them, and in some cases, I may say most, or maybe those that are most prominent and in the forefront are not positive. And we absolutely want our young people to take in positivity and concepts, ideas, and notions that will help them be successful, help them have a positive self-image, help them understand who they are and their role in their community. However, much of what is getting to our children yesterday and today in this very, very capitalistic, commercial, superficial, unreality age of social media, so much of it is damaging and so much of it is incongruent to the nature of a Black child specifically. And so, yes, I was absolutely scanning for threats. And as I, have my children now into young adulthood, and I'm thankful to the community that played a part in the rearing up of these young men. I thank Allah God for their safety and blessing them to, reach the age that they are, and to do it, largely unimpacted physically by the violence and the craziness of this world. But man, I had to be a gatekeeper. And when I observe what's happening and that things that are happening in legislation, things that are happening in schools, it's concerning. It's very, very concerning. And so what we do know about children is that they test limits. They take risks. And that's just developmental, right? Your 3-year-old is going to take a risk by, climbing up onto a seesaw or on a sliding board ladder, and they're going to go down the sliding board, and we are waiting for them at the end. The risk that a 13-year-old is going to take is much different than the 3-year-old, and the risk that a 16-year-old will take is maybe different than the 13-year-old. And so we know risk-taking behavior. Children are feeling their way through the world. And so all of that they do is developmental. But now what we're observing is the systems that are establishing relationships with our children to drive them from the sphere of our influence. And I talk about media a lot because media pumps messages to our young people. And many of these messages and images are contrary to the morals that we're instilling in our children. In what we're teaching our children is decent and right. And modern culture is saturated with very, very odd and strange messages. And so if all we had to deal with was media, that would be a task in and of itself in confronting the challenging messages that our young people derive from media. But now we have to compete with legislation. In reading the news, I read recently that there is legislation that the courts can strip a parent of parental rights if the parent's ideas contradict the ideas of their child. And this is happening in states across this nation. There are states where girls can receive abortions without parental consent or guardian involvement. And that is so concerning. In tackling the abortion laws, the thought that a child is undergoing a surgical procedure with anesthesia that can cause death. Anyone who has provided consent and read the actual potential adverse reactions to anesthesia, you know how severe, right, an adverse reaction can be to anesthesia. And then just a surgical procedure, and our daughters can be undergoing these things without us consenting or just having an acknowledgement that we're aware that our daughters can be going through these procedures. And the idea that our children can be taken from our influence if we disagree on values. I mean, that's scary. And we have a culture where children are being told that you don't have to listen to your parents. Whatever it is that you say, whatever it is that you feel, you have the right to act on it regardless of what your parents say. That's heavy. That's very, very heavy. And children are being empowered to engage in behavior, activity that parents may not have any knowledge of. And the reason why I think some of this is so damaging is if your child doesn't go to school, even though you drove your child to that school, if your child cuts school, you're responsible. And so your child's truancy is something that as a parent, you can be prosecuted, right? For your child not attending school. What if your child says, well, I don't want to go to school? Right? We're still charged with that. But if a child says, I want to be this, or I want to be that, or I want to think this way, or dress that way, or engage in this behavior, our children are now being empowered to say, regardless of what your parents think, feel, if your parent disagrees with you, their rights will be terminated. That is a very, very concerning idea. And then after legislation, I think about what's happening in the schools and the messages and that are being promoted in the schools and what's being put into curriculum that our children are learning and are being taught, by teachers. I mean, it's really concerning. The parental role is being minimized, is being challenged, and it's being threatened. You send your child to school to learn, math and reading and grammar, and they're being inundated with social and political agendas. We should be very, very concerned. We should be very aware of what's happening in our schools. We should go to the school board meetings. We should, see what our children have in their book bags, what's in the textbooks that they're reading. It's difficult. Parenting is warfare in modern America. And if you are trying to shape and guide your child, you have to scan the horizon for threats, and you have to be vigilant. And because, like I said, there are influences that's trying to pry our children from us, and it's happening constantly. So we as parents have to be so thoughtful. We have to be so proactive. I mean, we have to be on top of this thing. And so I definitely believe in active parenting. I know that lazy parents cannot produce successful children. And we have to be cautious about what this world defines as success. But, lazy parents don't produce successful children. So we have to be very, very active in our parenting. And so just 3 things I want to share with the parents who are listening to this, or the grandparents who are listening to this, or the guardians who are listening to this. Parent actively. I mean, we have to be prepared for battle as parents. So, as we are modeling behavior and instilling our values very early on in the lives of our children, we need to have a community. We should have our children around people who think like us and identify your community and why these people are a part of your community, so that you are not the only voice, You are not the only person in your child's circle that's sharing the values that you're trying to get into the hearts and mind of our children, right? So we have to have a community. And then 2, let's talk and let's listen. Let's talk and let's listen. Every car ride was an opportunity to talk to my children and also listen to them, and especially with boys as they're younger and, they love mommy and mom and they're listening and they may be hanging on to our every word. That is if we can get them to put down their devices, or we don't give them devices at an early age to distract them from us and the messages we're sharing with them. But man, a car ride is a great opportunity to talk with our children, to teach them. There's so much happening in the world. Every moment is a teachable moment. Every moment is a moment worth having a conversation where we are with our children. The dinner table, take a walk with your children, but talk and listen. And even if we hear something from our child, it's not always the time to tell them that what they're thinking is incorrect, to tell them that we're displeased with what they've said. Give them an opportunity to open up to us, because if we talk and we listen without immediate condemnation, the third thing that happens is that we build trust. And as we're building trust, then our children know they can have the confidence that they can come to mom, that they can come to dad, and that mom and dad don't just talk at them, but we have conversations with them, and they listen, and we're listening to them and showing them that we value what's in their mind. We value opportunities to talk and to communicate and to share ideas. And then we don't just tell our children no. Sometimes we have to tell them no. And then sometimes we say no, and here is why, right? And that helps to build trust, where our children know that a conversation is a two-way avenue with them. And as we're talking and we're listening to them and they're honing their ideas, we get to see what they're valuing. We get to see what's influencing them. And we understand that there's more influencing our children than just us. And because of that, we have to be very, very active parents, because in modern America, parenting is warfare. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Until next time, stay in peace.
We were brought here as a piece of property, and to keep that piece of property, it is to not allow the property to know the value of the property. What I mean by that, if you had known the history of yourself, you would not have been made a slave. And you won't be a slave now if you have a knowledge of yourself. It's hard to enslave a person that have equal knowledge with you. You just can't do it. And so this knowledge of yourself is the thing that will free you from what you have been suffering from.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Nora Speaks podcast. Be on the lookout for a new episode coming at you fresh next week. And as always, if you want to learn more about me and the work that I do, visit my website, noramahammed.com. Or if you have a listener question, email me at info@noraspeaks.com. You can also follow the Nora Speaks podcast on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Nora Speaks Podcast. I'll be sure to include links in the show notes. If this show has value to you, please subscribe, rate, and review, and share it with family and friends. And be sure to check out previous episodes. And remember, don't just join the movement, be the movement. Stay in peace.